Ivan Krastev est né en 1965 à Lukovic, au nord de la Bulgarie, une jeunesse sous régime communiste. Diplômé en philosophie, il se passionne très vite pour les sciences politiques. À la chute du mur en 1989, les mutations du monde post-soviétique deviennent le cœur de sa réflexion, intégrant et fondant différents centres de réflexion à Sofia et à Vienne. Aujourd'hui politologue reconnu, sur les questions de démocratie, il provoque volontiers. Autant d'essais et de pensées qui sont des avertissements dans les capitales européennes.
Bonjour Ivan Krastev, zdravejte Ivan Krastev. We are here in Brussels with my Italian colleague Andrea Pipino from International. Maybe first question, quite simple, but the answer is more complicated. How is Europe?
Listen, Europe is in a difficult moment. The world is changing, and the world which is basically ending in front of our eyes was a world in which Europe was feeling well. This was the world in which Europe basically has found its place. So now Europe is trying to reposition, and this is going to be a painful process.
How do you reckon that in the last 5 or 6 years the situation has changed worldwide and also at the European stage level?
But listen, a lot of things have changed. Our societies have changed. The information sphere has changed dramatically. So one of the interesting stories about the crisis of democracy is that if you go historically, you're going to see that democracy is always in crisis. This is kind of the natural language of democracy. For me, something much more fundamentally has changed. The border between democracy and authoritarianism has been blurred a lot. My last point on this is also that this crisis of democracies is experienced both by those who govern and those who are governed. Listen, I'm coming from a country in which for the last 3 years, you have 8 parliamentary elections. We cannot form a majority. This is combination between fragmentation and polarization that is really kind of making the country ungovernable. And people all the time, they had the feeling that they have the vote, but they don't have power.
Do you think this phenomenon of polarization and impossibility to govern a country is widespread in Western European countries as well, or it's mostly Bulgarian or other small countries in Eastern Europe?
No, I don't believe it. I can see it, for example, in Austria. To be honest, I see it in France, with the 3 poles that basically cannot form a majority. You have democracies that have been very used to a certain level of consensual politics. This is lost, and from this point of view, they became savaged in a very special way. For example, listen, this is suicidal for any political elite not to be able to form a government after 8 elections. You are going to say what these people are doing to themselves, forget about the nation.
And regarding the US election, should it worry us, or it's a kind of symptom of this time of polycrisis, you know?
American elections is a major change. And their major change between in 2016, when Donald Trump was elected for the first time. If 2016, nobody knew what he wants, now everybody knows what he wants. They're going to do what they're saying that they will do. And from this point of view, even if his government is not going to be particularly successful, even if he's going to fail, America is not going to be back where it was. And they're going to be a different America. And one, particularly for Europe, one more issue, we tend to believe that we know America and we compare with European politics. And probably this was true in 50s and 60s in New York. You're going to have all these French intellectuals or exiles from Germany or Eastern Europe. You have this Cold War liberal consensus. Now American ideological consensus is in Miami. This is the Latin America leaders running away from progressive governments. This is Trump himself. So this is really different America in much more deeper sense, also demographically very different than the America that we know.
And in this context, we have a question from our partner, Polish partner, Gazeta Wyborcza. Is Europe capable of taking care of its security and neighborhood on its own in this context?
No, at some point you are not going to depend because Americans are not interested. It's not. But Europe, when it comes to security, is in a very tricky position. Russia's war in Ukraine, in my view, basically challenged 4 of the major assumptions on which European security was based. Economic interdependence. Listen, we can laugh at Merkel, but this is how it worked. You're always trying to believe that the more you basically trade with somebody, the less is the risk of war starting. The second thing is America's security guarantees. We don't know exactly how it's going to develop. They cannot be taken for granted. Thirdly, nationalism. Because what came with Ukraine is that what in a certain way shocked positively Europe and all the admiration came, you see people who are ready to die for their country. Where in Europe we talk about security all the time, talk about budgets. Budgets don't fight wars. People fight wars. And sacrifice is not part of the social contract in Europe these days. Government don't believe that they can ask people, particularly in the West, to do this.
In light of this, do you think that anything less than a full victory for Ukraine would be acceptable for the US and Europe?
At this moment, if they're not going to be a miracle, it's very difficult to imagine that Ukraine is going to be able to recover its territories. And one of the interesting stories about this war that people are not talking much about, it's not a war about land. It is very much about identity, but also population. I do believe for Putin, Russia without Ukraine is not Russia. And you're never going to understand the war if you're not going to understand the abduction of kids, which started. It's our kids. We need people. We need Russians. There are not enough Russians in the world.
In this respect, how do you think that Ukraine can become part of the future architecture of security in Europe?
Listen, if Trump is going to do what he wants to do, you're going to have a ceasefire at the cost of neutrality and Russia controlling some of the territories that they control now. Then for the Ukraine, the story is what it means, how ceasefire looks like peace or not. Are people going to come back? Are investments going to come back? And for them, in my view, the only way is to ask for Western troops to be there and to be as a peacekeepers and guarantees for this. And then the second question is how economically Ukraine is going to be integrated, because the most important is they want people back. And this is critically important. The longer the war goes, as we know from sociology, the less is the likelihood that people go back. So it's going to be very, very difficult, and Ukraine cannot stay on its own. Ukraine is big. At least economically and politically, Ukraine should be part of Europe. But for President Putin, victory means Zelensky out.
So move to economy now. I have a question from IR, it's a Latvian partner, about competitiveness. European economy is struggling and our lag behind the US is increasing. So you can there is a report, the Draghi report, and you can analyze it.
The story is that, listen, there's some countries and there's certain economies which are much more dynamic than people see. But Europe cannot get competitive simply on the strength of the public investments. There should be much more dynamism in the system. They should be slightly much more high-risk behavior. See what happened with Trump. Trump comes to America. It's a quite unpredictable government, and then suddenly American market skyrocketed, and European market went down. And Europe is going to be in the middle, not simply because of the Russia-Ukrainian war, but also because of the trade war between United States and China. Because Donald Trump is a warrior, but he's a trade warrior. And this is going to be incredible, and how Europe is going to inject dynamism, particularly on the level of startups, middle businesses, how you're going to create a much more dynamic environment. This is a big issue, but quite often these are national decisions. So the money can come from Brussels, but Brussels is not going to create this. And it is a strange story, because Americans are going to deregulate. If we're going simply to respond to this with over-regulations, it's not going to work.
You mentioned the demographic crisis of Eastern Europe before, and I think it is closely linked to another topic that you have covered a lot in your books, which is migration. What do you think is the reason why Europe has this incredible fear of people who want to come and live inside its borders?
It's a great question, and here the demographic anxiety and migration are very connected. Listen, what people are starting to discover is that now majority of the people in the world, by the way, no difference, democracy, authoritarian regimes, are living in countries where the birth rate is below the reproduction level. As a result of it, suddenly, particularly if you're coming from a small nation, and many Europeans are, in the moment in which in the Silicon Valley they talk about the immortality of the man, you discover the mortality of the nation.
But there is also in this kind of pan-European fear, there is also, you have written about that, there is a fear of disappearance also.
Totally, because you have out-migration. Listen, Bulgaria is the fastest shrinking demographically nation in human history in the absence of war or natural disaster. In 1989, there was 9 million people living in the country, now there's 6.5. Every single month, a village is dying in Bulgaria because the last person living there is dying. And my basic understanding of structure of European politics these days is that we have two extinction rebellions. On the left are people who fear climate change. And for many of them, less people is better. And also they said, if we continue living like this, they are not going to replace life on Earth. And on the other is basically on the right, you have the demographic extinction rebellion. But what is important that both of them see the future as a threat. Future is something that we don't want to come. And I'm saying this because you started asking about democracy. Democracy is preconditioned on open future. Close the future, make people fear the future, and the democratic institutions are paralyzed.
So it's a way to be optimistic.
For sure. Listen, there is, because as you know, I have been always asked this question about optimism, pessimism. But there is one thing which is common between optimists and pessimists. Both of them believe that they know how future is going to look like. But future has the habit to surprise us. So being pessimistic does not make sense.
In light of this, do you think that Europe can retain its crucial, pivotal role, we could say, on the global scale in the future?
Europe is not going to be the center of the world. The world is changing. By the way, Europe has its own chance. And the chance is to have societies that want to live in the way they want to live. And from this point of view, probably we're not going to be the superpower in the way the European empires have been in the 19th century, but it is not necessarily a bad news.
Merci, Ivan Krastev.
Благодаря.
Thank you. Bulgarian language is becoming fashionable.